Thank you very much for this opportunity to help you explore why climate protection is not costly but profitable, and what proven energy solutions could help take humankind off the endangered species list, possibly to be replaced by the oil and electricity industries as we know them, because they're turning into something quite different. 4/5 of the world's energy comes from digging up and burning each year 4 cubic miles of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. The industries that do this with immense skill are the third largest sector of the U.S. economy. And I'd like to tell you a story about how big industries like oil and electricity can be transformed by new discoveries. In 1850, there were no cars and no oil wells. Most homes were lit by oils extracted from whales and burned in lamps. Whaling was America's 5th largest industry. Yet, in a single century, it grew to world dominance and then suddenly disappeared. Strong demand and global hunting made whales shy and scarce. Costs rose as fleets got bigger but less productive, so prices got volatile and shot past those of coal oil. Lamp conversion kits emerged. Michael Dietz's clean burning model paid back in months and flipped the market in 3 years. So in the 9 years before Drake struck oil in Pennsylvania, rock oil, petroleum, whale oil lost over 5/6 actually, of its lighting market. The whalers were astounded to run out of customers before they ran out of whales. The remnant whale populations were saved by technological innovators and profit-maximizing capitalists until those same forces of industrialization killed even more whales in the 20th century. So whale oil lost to coal oil and town gas, which lost to Rockefeller's kerosene, which 2 decades later lost to Thomas Edison's 20-fold more efficient electric lights. Those then got 11-fold more efficient. It took them 130 years. Better new lamps slowly followed. But then, like a thunderbolt, came white LEDs. Each decade, they got 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, and 10 times cheaper. So 2/3 of us are now buying them. In the next 5 years, they will take 2/3 of the world's general lighting market. They're rocking the $200 billion a year lighting services market. And since lighting uses 1/7 of the world's electricity, LEDs are prying open a historic crack in the business model of electric utilities. See, Thomas Edison didn't sell electricity, he sold light. He would charge you a penny to run a lamp for an hour. But as electric motors became popular and meters became available, New York Edison Company wanted to switch to selling kilowatt hours. Edison probably didn't foresee that his lamps would ultimately become so antique they'd be outlawed, but he did know as an inventor that lamps were going to become a lot more efficient. So to capture their lower operating cost, he wanted to keep selling lighting services, not kilowatt hours. He was overruled in 1892, and utilities have been making the same mistake ever since. So greater customer efficiency cuts their revenues, not their costs. They sell a commodity when what customers want is an infrastructure or a service. And now entrepreneurs as impressive as Edison are building new industries that can sweep away the old model by saving electricity and providing it differently. The oil and gas industries, too, grew up selling molecules, not the energy services customers want, like hot showers and cold beer and mobility. So that's catching up with them as efficiency accelerates from the sedate pace of old lamps to the blinding pace of LEDs. And yet most fossil fuel companies pay about as little attention to competition from radical energy efficiency as the whalers paid to Michael Dietz. What else changes this fast? Well, LEDs turn electricity into light. Photovoltaics, PVs, turn light into electricity. And in the past 5 years, PV's meteorite strike has fatally disrupted utilities by making solar power cost less than traditional power plants' fossil fuels. And wind power, the lower aqua curve, is now so cheap that it often makes old coal, gas, and nuclear plants shut down as uneconomic to run. PVs are actually now less capital intensive than Arctic oil, not counting the ability to use electrons more effectively than molecules. And had Shell not abandoned its $7 billion Arctic venture, but kept on and found oil, it could never have charged a high enough price to pay for it. Energy efficiency is the biggest and cheapest competitor. My Shell paper called Efficiency, the Rest of the Iceberg, describes how oil companies can run their supply-side tankers into the efficiency iceberg and sink without even knowing what they hit because they weren't properly tracking it, so it wasn't on their chart. Which oil and gas markets are in danger from disruptions? Well, nearly all of them. Over decades, reserves unburnable for climate reasons could well prove smaller than reserves unsellable for competitive reasons. That is, oil companies are even more at risk from market competition than from climate regulation. If the oil business sputters at $90 a barrel and swoons at $50, how will it do against the $25 cost of getting U.S. mobility completely off oil? What if the biggest challenge weren't falling price, but vanishing demand? Now, energy efficiency plus structural shifts in the U.S. economy have cut today's energy use by more than we actually use. That is, if America's total energy use had grown with the economy at the 1975 level of energy usage per dollar of GDP, we'd have used this much energy, but instead, as Sally just said, we cut that in half, more than half, saving cumulative energy equivalent to 21 years of U.S. energy use at the current rate. But meanwhile, total renewable energy output has doubled and yet had a cumulative impact 31 times less than the savings. Last year alone, renewables grew briskly, yet energy savings grew 3 times more. I'm sure Jim will tell us great new stuff about this. Now, no energy company foresaw this, nor does any today fully foresee efficiency's continuing expansion as the low-hanging fruit keeps growing back faster than we pick it, as I'll explain later. So are oil companies competitors other hydrocarbon companies, or are they people like these whose innovations can be to the oil business as Dietz's lamp was to whalers? Some of their innovations are technologies. Most are more disruptive than that. And 7 billion minds linked by 6 billion cell phones can scale global change non-linearly, especially when technology becomes vernacular. So what giant industries today are beginning unprecedented change? Well, Thomas Edison on the right invented the electricity industry a few decades before Henry Ford on the left, who, by the way, used to work at Detroit Edison Company, industrialized the automobile fueled by John D. Rockefeller's oil. And these energy sectors transformed humanity, and yet at their core, these industries have changed little for a century. If Ford and Edison took a nap on one of their car camping trips together and a very long nap and then woke up and saw their businesses today, they would recognize almost everything except the electronics. Yet today their industries face vast disruptions as 21st century technology and speed collide head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Oil and electricity, each emitting 2/5 of fossil carbon, are only 4% connected globally, less than 1% in this country. But as we might imagine Ford mischievously muttering to Edison, let's see what happens when electricity displaces automotive oil. Then those electric cars add flexibility and distributed storage to the grid, helping efficiency and renewables to replace giant power plants and the fossil fuels they burn. So this approach applies General Eisenhower's advice to make tough problems soluble by expanding their boundaries to encompass more options and more synergies. All 4 energy-using sectors, transportation, buildings, industry, and electricity, save more energy faster together than separately. All 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, not just public policy, but also new business strategy, can combine to create some deeply disruptive game changers while old industries are still putting on their boots. So let's start with technology. In automobiles, the biggest oil user, and summarize a strategic shift underway in at least 4 to 7 automakers It's something we developed at RMI in 91 and then spread in 93 by open sourcing it. The physics are pretty simple. Weight causes 2/3 of the fuel use in a typical car, and removing weight leverages 7 times larger fuel savings at the tank because you don't need to waste 6 units getting that energy to the wheels. 15 years ago, we designed a half normal weight carbon fiber hybrid SUV, boosting efficiency 4 to 6-fold with a 2-year payback. 8 years ago, Toyota showed such a car with the interior volume of a Prius, but half its fuel use and 1/3 its weight, well under 1,000 pounds. And now 1 and 2 liter equivalent per 100 kilometer, that is roughly 120 to 240 mile a gallon, carbon fiber electrified cars are on the market from Volkswagen and BMW, which confirmed that the carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. Our even faster and cheaper manufacturing technique that made this carbon cap in 1 minute 8 years ago can now make complex 2x2 meter parts in 1 or 2 minutes, and it's in the global supply chain. You can tell from the sound how stiff and strong that is. Pass it around as long as I get it back. So making all U.S. autos that way could save 1.5 Saudis or half an OPEC by drilling in a very prospective play called the Detroit Formation. The cost of those nega barrels is $18 per saved barrel and falling, and that pays for the electrification. It turns out that the ultralighting itself is approximately free, paid for by a 2/3 smaller powertrain and radically simplified manufacturing using 80% less capital investment. Ultralight electric vehicles can spread and their prices can drop even faster with a temporary fee bait, that is, rebates for efficient new autos paid for by fees on inefficient ones. The biggest of 6 such programs in France tripled in the first 2 years the speed of improving auto efficiency, and the strongest one in Norway has given electric vehicles 10 times their U.S. market share. Electric cars, especially heavy ones, need thousands of batteries, so that production volume is making batteries rapidly cheaper. The biggest lithium-ion battery maker, Tesla, just announced price drops for home power systems that are consistent with its automotive battery costs, but 3 years sooner than mainstream analysts expected. Tesla expects at least another 30% price drop in the next couple of years from its Gigafactory, and then more, and new chemistries are also emerging. So all this is going to speed both getting cars off oil and switching electricity production from fossil fuels to renewables. Moreover, the distributed storage in electric cars that we're buying anyway for mobility help to integrate variable solar and wind power into the grid, making the oil and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately, as we'll see. The automotive physics and business logic also apply to big vehicles. Walmart's heavy truck fleet is using half the fuel intensity of a decade ago, and that includes smarter logistics, but current technology alone can profitably triple the efficiency of heavy trucks. That plus the triple to quintuple efficiency airplanes designed at places like Boeing and NASA and MIT can move $0.9 trillion net present value from oil companies' top line to Americans' pockets. In both heavy and light vehicles, today's military revolution in energy efficiency will speed these advances in the civilian sector, which uses over 50 times as much oil, much as military R&D in the past created the internet, GPS, and the jet engine and microchip industries. But this time, speeding the journey beyond oil so our warfighters can have nega missions in the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. Mission unnecessary. They really like that idea. Autos are not just heading for 4 to 8-fold higher efficiency, they're also being driven less. Generations X and Y tend not even to want to own a car because it's cheaper and easier not to. Smartphones can now bridge once annoying route gaps by summoning ubiquitous transport services on demand. One San Franciscan reported she was saving $11,000 a year by replacing her car with Uber, Lyft, public transit, walking, biking, and Get Around, which is a smartphone app for renting your neighbor's car when it's unneeded and parked, as U.S. cars are about 95% of the time. If you ever do need a car, you don't need to own it. In some Chinese cities, renting a Condi electric vehicle from a giant vending machine costs about $3 an hour. Also, renting shared cars when you need them can boost their utilization about tenfold and then probably redouble it with partly or fully autonomous vehicles like this Mercedes-Benz concept car or the ones Google and Apple are developing. Autonomy drops the total cost per mile of electric vehicles about 2/5 below that of fueled vehicles because they're driven so many more miles that their tenfold lower energy cost per mile more than offsets their higher sticker price. So the mobility IT mashup means radically fewer vehicles disrupting automakers and all electric vehicles driving fewer total miles, further disrupting oil companies. So autos are morphing from pigs, that is, personal internal combustion, gasoline, steel-dominated vehicles, to SEALs, shareable, electrified, autonomous, lightweight service vehicles. So there goes oil companies' biggest markets. But not only are vehicles transforming, so are the ways we use them, starting with new urban design. In 2010, nearly half the world's cars were sold in China, and at that time, only 5% of people there owned cars, and yet this 60-mile traffic jam took 12 days to unsnarl. Building roads causes traffic, so politicians are changing the rules. In Tokyo, to buy a car, you must own a parking space. Denmark taxes new cars 180%, plus 95% duty if they're over 2 tons, plus an annual inefficiency tax. A license plate in Shanghai costs more than the small car you put it on. Smoggy Beijing will register your electric car instantly for free, but if you want a new fueled car, you enter a lottery where you have about a 1% chance of winning the right to buy a registration. Cars are being phased out in central Copenhagen and Helsinki. Singapore and Oslo inspired London's nearly $40 a day tax fee to drive your car downtown, shifting peak period commuting to 85% public transit and cutting congestion 30%. And China has over 200 million electric vehicles with 2 wheels, many replacing motorcycles, maybe a fifth replacing cars. China's 2,000 miles of bus rapid transit may quintuple in the next 5 years, transforming the Hangzhou Street on the left to the street on the right, carrying 800,000 riders daily. And over 30 million commuters use bus rapid transit in nearly 200 cities worldwide. It can achieve subway route density at about 5% the cost. China plans in the next 15 years to build new cities for as many people as America has. Designing those cities around feet, not cars, means 2/3 less driving and 1/3 less concrete. Integrating and distributing where people live, work, shop, and play means people needn't travel far nor by car. So shifting from this arterial vehicle network to a capillary web builds a human ecology with vibrant commerce, rich social life, but equal or better throughput, cleaner air, happier citizens. And the 53 cities already doing this, and more to come, will use little oil. So even in the US, where we've already built our cities around cars, and without the pigs to seals transition or the other latest innovations, we can greatly enhance mobility while phasing out oil. We can first get efficient by technologies included or overlooked in the official forecast, and then use vehicles more productively, including getting the same access from 46 to 84% less driving by new urbanist design, IT integration, and charging real-time driving costs per mile, not per gallon. Then we can switch fuels. Super efficient autos can use any mixture of hydrogen fuel cells, electricity, and advanced biofuels. Heavy trucks and airplanes can realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen, or trucks could even burn natural gas, but no vehicles will need oil. Any biofuels needed could be made 2/3 from waste without displacing cropland and without harming soil or climate. Even 5 years ago, some mainstream analysts began to see peak oil not in supply, but in demand. Sure enough, U.S. gasoline use has been falling for 8 years, European for 10. Like whale oil in the 1850s, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. Natural gas is no longer a safe haven for oil companies either. It just goes away more slowly. Efficiency, renewables, and cogeneration displace natural gas for generating electricity. Together, these three non-fossil competitors got over $630 billion of investment worldwide in 2013 alone. They often beat the most efficient gas-fired power plants just on operating cost. Their advantage widens further if we count the market value of gas's price volatility, $2 or $3 a gigajoule, for fair comparison with efficiency renewables, which have no fuel and no price volatility. They deliver at a constant price for decades. And gas-fired heat will also be gradually displaced by efficient buildings, smarter industrial processes, and solar process heat. Now, for 30 years, U.S. wholesale gas prices in green have been unrelated to official gas price forecasts in blue, a warning against buying gas-fired power plants based on spot price. The inherent volatility of gas prices complicates risk management and deters finance. So the new story here about abundant and affordable energy for the long haul is less about fracked gas than about its inexhaustible, benign, carbon-free, and stably priced physical hedges, efficiency and renewables that are outpacing it and increasingly outcompeting it. Here's the big picture of energy efficiency, meanwhile. In 1975, U.S. government and industry all insisted that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never go down. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 67% in 50 years. So far, it's dropped 54% in 39 years. And yet, just the innovations so far can save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at a third the real cost. And 4 years later, even that looks conservative. That's partly because of an innovation that our little black swan hatchery has developed over the past 3 decades. It's called Integrative Design, and it can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. Remember how in cars a smaller propulsion system could pay for the ultralighting that shrank it? Well, can we do the same thing with buildings, which in the U.S. use a third of the directly burned natural gas and 3/4 of the electricity? You might think that I would burn a lot of gas to stay warm 2,200 meters up in the Rocky Mountains down to minus 47 F, minus 44 C, but my house does no combustion. That's so 20th century. Indeed, it has no heating system. Super insulation, ventilation, heat recovery, and super windows that insulate like 16 sheets of glass make it 99% passive solar heated. Eliminating the heating system more than paid up front for the efficiency that displaced it, and saving about 90% of household electricity too still yielded a 10-month payback. By now the energy savings have paid for the whole house. The central atrium, seen here in a February snowstorm, has produced so far 59 passive solar banana crops. Without needing to look like this, my house helped inspire over 40,000 European passive buildings that likewise have no heating and roughly normal construction cost. And this works from Old Snowmass to Bangkok, but wherever you live, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. In the top of the upper middle picture, you see a white arch that holds up the middle of my house. It has 12 functions, but it has only one cost. How fast is integrative design improving? Well, our 2010 retrofit of the Empire State Building first remade the windows into super windows that would pass light but block heat. That shrank the chillers, saving $17 million of capital cost. That more than paid for the super windows, cutting the total payback to 3 years. And the 38% energy savings seemed pretty good until our cost-effective Denver retrofit 3 years later saved 70%, making this half-century-old federal office complex more efficient than the best new U.S. office, which in turn is only half as efficient as our own new office, now nearing completion 4 years later with no central heating or cooling equipment. Yet all the technologies that new building needed were already available over 10 years ago. What's mainly improved is not technology, but design, the way we put technology together. Even in sweltering India, Rohan Parikh every quarter has been building a roughly 22,000 square meter Infosys office building using 4/5 less energy than the Indian norm at 10 or 20% lower capital cost with superior comfort and satisfaction. Industry, which uses half the world's energy, can save $500 billion net present value dollars worth of energy just in the United States. Dow Chemical, for example, has already returned over $9 billion on a $1 billion efficiency investment, but there's much more to do. For example, industry owns most of the motors that use 3/5 of the world's electricity. Half that motor power runs pumps and fans, yet integrative design made a typical industrial pumping loop use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps, motors, and controls, but by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. That also shrank the pumping equipment and the total capital cost. So this isn't even a new technology, it's just rearranging our metal furniture as designers. Doing this to all pump and fan systems could save about 1/5 of the world's electricity, or half the coal-fired electricity, or more than all the gas-fired electricity. What do such savings mean for the electricity that's 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the fuel burned at the power plant to the end use, many successive losses compound, so only 1/10 of the energy in the fuel comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards from right to left, and every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe compounds back to save 10 units of fuel, cost, and emissions at the power plant. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. In over $40 billion worth of diverse industrial redesigns for leading global firms, our team has typically found savings around 40 to 90% with generally lower capital costs for new construction, or for retrofits, about 30 to 60% with 2 or 3 year paybacks. Now, such big savings and expanding returns are well proven, and yet they are not in any official study or industry forecast or engineering textbook I've ever seen. That's interesting. It means it's not in climate policy either. But the energy efficiency revolution is only part of a larger energy transformation, our species' biggest shift since agriculture. It's part of a larger shift from molecules and atoms to bits and packets, from hardware to software, from hierarchies to networks. And even as it wipes out the oil industry's market, it's transforming the electricity industry from centralized, supply-focused, fossil and uranium-fueled, and brittle, to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. The deepest change is how the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. It's generally wise to sell customers what they want before someone else does, and customers are figuring out that they can buy fewer electrons, use them more productively and timely, produce their own, and even share them with others. For example, Dutch customers can now buy renewable electricity directly from other customers. Here's the peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source. It's the legal electricity version of a music file swapping site. I just met a German utility executive who lives in Holland, and he buys his electricity from the guy in the upper left because he really liked that cute piglet. And then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. What big utility can dream of that kind of customer intimacy? Indeed, disruptors are converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. Efficient use is taking utilities' sales while renewables beat its supplies. Integrative design makes electricity savings far bigger and cheaper, while customer preferences for independence, accountability, transparency, clean supply, health, remote control, superior value and experience can drive market choices. Invisibly optimizing when electricity is used and time-shifting supply through storage can intensify distributed renewables competition. New rules can reallocate risks and rewards, like the New York Rev proceeding we're very active in. And some of the greatest changes come from new financing mechanisms, new business models. For example, an automaker could profitably sell you an electric car at a deep discount in return for being allowed, when it is parked and plugged in, to swap its stored electricity and other ancillary services with the grid without compromising your driving. Smart appliances can be worth giving away because running them conveniently at optimal times can be worth more than they cost. That's now happening in this state for electric car charging. So these 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast. They don't just add, they exponentiate. They are not lone wolves. They hunt in packs, as Pac-Men do, and they multiply quickly, and they feed on utility revenues. So together, they are creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utilities, cultures, and stakeholders can cope. In August 2014, all central power plants were called dinosaurs. Too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long term. Who said that? It wasn't Greenpeace. It was Union Bank of Switzerland. I've already sketched the first 2 disruptors, which are making growth in electricity demand reverse in developed countries, down in 5 of the past 7 years in this country, part of Sally's earlier graph of reduced emissions, and slow down in developing countries. Australia is an interesting example. The big state utilities there overinvested, raising prices. In 2010, they forecast steep demand growth, but got shrinkage. In 2011, they delayed the forecast growth a year and got more shrinkage. In 2012, they started recognizing reality, but kept hoping for growth later and were again disappointed. In 2013, the contradiction intensified with rapid growth of rooftop solar, which counts as a negative load. Australia has about 10 times this state's per capita PV adoption. And in 2014, the utilities began forecasting more realistically, being more right this time. But this year, with demand still heading down, they raised the forecast. Just the past 5 years' revolution in demand could cut their 2020 revenues by about 1/5. Now, electric utilities, don't follow MBA economics, where lower demand drops prices. Most of the costs are fixed for power plants and grids already built. Lower demand spreads the same fixed costs across smaller sales. Now, Thomas Edison's Chicago-based secretary, Samuel Insull, built the industry on a virtuous circle of rapid demand growth, ever bigger plants, ever cheaper production, hence lower prices spurring more demand. But if efficient use instead shrinks demand, Insull's spiral reverses into a vicious circle of higher prices and lower demand. And if big old plants also can't beat a swarm of new ones, then this death spiral intensifies. Utilities must indeed compete to serve customers' shrinking demand, not just against distributed generation, but against a formidable triplet of disruptors that are emerging very quickly, as we already saw with the meteor strike by PVs. The range of prices for U.S. wholesale electricity is now widely undercut by the average U.S. prices at which wind power and solar power are being sold on long-term contracts at constant nominal price, therefore declining real price. And these prices keep falling. They do reflect federal subsidies, but the wind power subsidy already expired for projects not begun by the end of last year. The solar subsidy is set to fall by 2/3 at the end of next year. The costs are falling faster than that, and the permanent subsidies for non-renewables are generally larger. Also, as Tony Seba points out, renewables fuel price is 0, so the utility gets no more revenue when you flip the switch, and your new oil or gas well make my next one cost more, but your new solar panel makes my next one cost less. Can fossil fuels really win that game? Bloomberg thinks not, and projects that over the next 15 years, fossil fuel and nuclear growth on the left will be cut in half, not counting their bigger retirements. These are global. While renewable growth on the right doubles. And here's the market evidence. In each of the last 4 years, modern renewables, not counting big hydro, have added over 80 gigawatts a year and received over $250 billion annual investment. China is proposing to add 1,000 gigawatts, nearly an American grid's worth, of renewables in the next 15 years. and maybe twice as much again by 2050. Lest you think that's impossible, China leads the world in 7 kinds of renewables, has for 3 years running produced more wind power than nuclear power, and in 2013 alone added more photovoltaic capacity than the U.S. has added since developing modern PVs 61 years ago. Germany's streamlined installation cuts in half the U.S. costs of rooftop solar systems, yet in over 20 of the United States, firms will now install rooftop PVs with no money down, or in the latest twist, cash back, and beat your electric bill. And Deutsche Bank says by 2017 that'll be profitable in about 80% of the world market. So bypassing power companies the way wireless phones bypassed wireline phone companies gives electricity executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. But modern renewables also scale up in a fundamentally different way. Traditionally, we built giant cathedral-like power plants, each costing billions of dollars and taking many years to license and build. But now, each year, with about the same capital, you can build a factory that produces each year thereafter enough solar cells to generate each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral would ultimately produce. So solar output worldwide has been scaling faster than cell phones. Yet we're often told that only coal, gas, and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind power and photovoltaics are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. Let me explain why neither part of that statement is true. First, variable does not mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in one stormy winter month forecast a day ahead the actual output of the country's wind farms. I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand that well. Also, we built the grid because no generator is 24/7. They all break, and when giant coal or nuclear plants fail, 1 billion watts vanishes in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. Grids routinely handle this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working ones. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can handle the forecastable variations of solar and wind power by backing up variable renewables, mainly with other renewables of other kinds or in other places. Thus, highly reliable power can come from a portfolio of largely or wholly renewable sources when they are forecasted and integrated and diversified by both type and location. Let me illustrate this with an aggressive but instructive hourly simulation from Texas, whose isolated grid is not connected to the rest of the United States. Its expected 2050 summer electric loads during a week can get a lot smaller and less peaky with efficient use. Then we can install enough wind and photovoltaics to provide 86% of the annual electricity. You can see how variable those really are. And then we can get the other 14% from the other renewables that are all dispatchable, like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, feedlot biogas burned in existing gas turbines, burning municipal waste, burning obsolete energy studies. So now we've got 100% renewable energy supply, but you can see it's not a great match to the load shape. We have both surpluses and deficits. So let's match it to the load by putting the surplus electricity into 2 kinds of distributed storage: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging and discharging of electric vehicles, both of which you'd want to buy anyway. Both, we'll assume, are fully built out by 2050. Then we can recover that energy when needed, fill in the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand, and now we've got all renewable power every hour of the year with only 5% of the annual renewable output left over, so the economics should be quite good. No bulk storage added. Now, this is not just theoretical. Some national grid operators already integrate variable renewables in this way. Germany was 27% renewably powered in 2014, Italy 33%, but 4 other European countries with modest to no hydropower got about half their electricity consumption from renewables last year, adding no bulk storage and with superior reliability. In fact, for Denmark and Germany, about 10 times as good as ours. So the operators have learned to run these grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously produces beautiful music. Making power generation the right size for the job is vital to economics and resilience. What the economist calls micropower, that is renewables minus big hydro plus cogeneration, now makes a fourth of the world's electricity and adds half the new generating capacity. Its most advanced national user, Denmark, has switched almost entirely in 3 decades from central power plants in red, mainly burning coal, to distributed wind turbines in blue, about 86% locally owned, and cogeneration in brown, often burning ag wastes. Denmark plans all renewable energy of all kinds by 2050 at essentially no extra cost. Utilities also face rapid shifts in what customers want and expect. In much of the world, cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts, accidental or deliberate, pose an increasingly existential threat. Hooking up distributed generators so they work with or without the grid, the way my house works, the way Denmark's cellular grid works, the Pentagon's strategy for powering military bases, is the foundation of energy resilience. In this country, we have this aging, dirty, insecure electricity system that has to be replaced by 2050. And it turns out whatever we replace it with is going to cost essentially the same, whether we buy more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or centralized renewables, or more distributed ones. But these 4 futures differ profoundly in 7 kinds of risk around national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. Our Reinventing Fire study found that distributed renewables best manage all 7 risks, and they're the only option that, if resiliently connected, can eliminate the cascading blackout risk. Other priorities elsewhere. India's quadrupled renewables goal, supported by the largely illiterate grandmothers training women as solar technicians in Barefoot College and other such efforts, is a very encouraging sign and very rapidly accelerating. In China, clean air is the biggest driver, and the coal burn began going down last year as the government adds fewer coal plants and runs them less. Germany's put a high priority on democratization and public ownership. Public owns half the renewables, and despite limited renewable potential, the country achieved its 2010 wind power target in 2005 and its 2050 solar target in 2012. Hawaiians have a similarly strong sense of community building and independence, and their high electricity prices have driven hundreds off the grid to solar plus batteries, a package Solar City will offer them next year. The synergy between PVs, on-site storage, and flexible demand is emerging very powerfully in Hawaii. In fact, far easier than leaving the grid, customers can swap electricity with it but use storage to time shift power and save money. For 5 U.S. locations, from Honolulu at the bottom to Westchester County in New York at the top, for households on the left and commercial buildings on the right, the colored annual bars from 2014 to 2050 project what fraction of electricity use could thereby be met more cheaply by solar without net metering than by grid power. Solar power can take over so fast that utility revenues could halve in the 2020s, and Tesla just moved those numbers 3 years to the left. Now add a third disruptor, flexible demand, whose IT infrastructure can provide other valuable services, creating economies of scope as well as of scale, and also exploiting Moore's law. So in the last 40 years, photovoltaics got 100 times cheaper, but microchips got 10 million times cheaper. Utilities match supply to demand, but IT lets customers match flexible demand to desired supply, making purchases of grid power small and off-peak. A typical Hawaiian household over 24 hours uses appliances at various times, roughly half while rooftop PVs are operating under the yellow curve, but the main utility there wants to confiscate the rest of the solar production without paying for it. How would customers respond? Well, smart appliances can soon conveniently move 80 or 90% of the household loads into the solar hours. So the utility would lose nearly all its intended windfall and most of its ordinary revenue. The more the monopolist or monopsonist tries to wrest value from the customer, the more the empowered customer can fight back. because a customer pushed this far is largely or wholly lost unless she chooses the utility. Because by making the electric vehicles charging bidirectional or adding other distributed storage, she can next shift the grid from necessary to optional. As regulators struggle to manage and entrepreneurs strive to speed all these swirling forces, how can incumbents respond? Should electricity companies ignore, deny, resist, diversify, hedge, finance, transform, or decline? Ostrich is not a good strategy. Sticking your head in the sand and your rump in the air lacks only a kick-me sign. Trying to block or tax competitors, as Edison Electric Institute urges and the Koch brothers lobbyists seek, is not promising either. Arizona Public Service tried that. They got just a tenth of the increased customer charge they wanted, and they got all these free headlines. Trying to tax the sun and suppress its use annoys customers, so they leave the grid faster. 6 utilities' anti-solar tariffs we just analyzed were all well-aimed boomerangs that turn out to speed and expand solar adoption. And the backfire intensifies by allying Greens with Tea Party libertarians and other conservative anti-monopolists. That green tea movement has already flipped utility politics in Florida, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Another possible strategy is just to hang on, choosing to be not a midwife for new technologies, but a mortician for old ones. For some players, for some time, this may work, but it's not much fun, and it's ever more vulnerable to competitors from all sides, and meanwhile, deteriorating finance narrows the options. In Germany, even before PVs made 5% of electricity, they had destroyed the business model and half the market cap for Europe's top 10 utilities. Last year, Germany's biggest generation share came from renewables. Fossil fuel generation hit a 35-year low. Wholesale power prices have dropped by half in 4 years, and this April they were lower on peak than off peak. But incumbents can embrace change. They can buy the insurgents and offer their products as their own branded products. They can do other kinds of co-opetition. They can collaborate to finance the transition. They can become a neutral integrator of all technically qualified offerings or various combinations. Germany's biggest and most market-owned utility, E.ON, has announced a bold plan to split in two. The new half will profitably deliver efficiency, renewables, and other customer-centric services. Shareholders will get the unprofitable legacy business of big thermal plants. Germany's second biggest utility, RWE, and French utility, GCEP Suez, have adopted similar customer-centric priorities. And these tectonic shifts fit a bigger pattern that 60 colleagues and I mapped 4 years ago. Our detailed synthesis, Reinventing Fire, showed how the U.S. could, by 2050, need no oil, coal, or nuclear energy and a third less gas, using tripled efficiency and quintupled renewables to run a 2.6-fold bigger economy, $5 trillion cheaper in net present value private internal cost, emitting about 84% less carbon and needing no new inventions nor acts of Congress, instead enabled and sped by smart subnational policies in mindful markets. Subnational is where we do most of our energy policy anyway in this country. The transition could be led by business for profit. So far, the U.S. is approximately on this trajectory, and similar strategies have been detailed in Europe and are emerging worldwide. This year, too, to report preliminarily, our Chinese consortium's similarly rigorous synthesis showed how China could achieve a 7-fold higher energy productivity, 12-fold higher carbon productivity, clean air, and 4/5 less coal burn, several $1 trillion cheaper than business as usual. Reinventing Fire China was written by the Chinese government's best energy modelers for the authors of the 13th five-year plan. And, if Reinventing Fire for the U.S. could be a model for developed countries and Reinventing Fire China for developing countries, then might both together offer a model for profitable climate protection for the world, built on those two countries' growing collaboration to solve the energy and climate problem together. It's turning out that to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and integrate it. The results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries, he said, are protected by public incredulity. But a troubling gap is opening between where the market's headed and where giant energy companies tend to concentrate their attention. Managers understandably focus on the need for price to exceed cost. But in focusing so intently on cost and margin, many risk forgetting the other part of the business imperative that value must exceed price. If competitors offer a superior value proposition and grab your customers and revenues, it doesn't matter how good you are at running your energy company. The Stanford Innovation lecturer, Tony Seba, evokes an illustration of how when that value proposition changes, as U.S. automotive history shows, markets can flip with breathtaking speed. On New York's Fifth Avenue in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. Then just 13 years later, you have to look even harder for what might be the last horse. A little hard to tell if there's any horses there. The horse and buggy industry thought it had many decades to adapt, but Henry Ford's Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 8% to 80% in a decade. In 1928, 3/4 of them used a GM and DuPont financial innovation called car loans. Well, today, PV modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. 3/4 of the rooftop solar in California is innovatively financed, and Ford's and Edison's industries are emerging. Horse and buggy thinking is dangerous, but still common. As the former oilman Maurice Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel, but DuPont's former chairman, Edgar Woolard, astutely reminded us that firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem because they simply won't be around long term. See, they're forgetting that the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents. Insurgents are not inhibited by incumbents' business models, legacy assets, or cultures. Moreover, investors flee even before customers do, because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. They act on leading indicators and gut hunches and herd behavior, all spreading at the speed of Twitter. So once the capital markets think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. For example, here's how the stock price of Solar City, which recently became a utility, has moved compared to Samuel Insull's descendant company, Exelon. Or here's how a 2003 automotive startup called Tesla gained half the market cap of General Motors while selling 0.6% as many cars. Investors still bear scars from the failure of big, strong companies that got too old and slow to survive the IT transition, although IBM did survive a near-death experience. But investors got rewarded by their replacements. Many investors now sense the energy industries are starting to be transformed beyond recognition, so they're getting skittish. And those changes are happening well within current planning horizons and executive tenures, and faster than many firms' cultures can tolerate, creating a formidable leadership challenge. As Jack Welch said, if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Which of the great companies on the left will be brave enough to make that perilous crossing, as Eon has begun, and join the firms on the right? Which category will you choose and encourage? Today's energy transformation isn't just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries from coal and oil and gas. But now the obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecoms, and software turn people from isolated to network and systems from dumb to smart. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy, from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. So let me end as I began, with the old story about how the Whalers went broke by overlooking Michael Dietz's new lamp. The last chapter of that story is now playing out in oil's last lighting market, which, if it were a country, would rank number 8 in carbon emissions, plus huge health costs. It's the kerosene lamps in the huts and hovels of 1.2 billion people with family income around $2 a day or less, and little prospect of getting or affording grid electricity. And these impoverished people pay $38 billion a year, 1/5 of global lighting's total costs, to produce very inefficiently 1/1000th of the world's light. But now they can banish darkness and teach their daughters and sons to read. An entrepreneurial village woman can sell or lease them an integrated photovoltaic LED, high-temperature lithium battery, smart chip controller, lighting package like this Waka Waka, Swahili for shines brightly, which will shine on one day's solar charge 10 hours at this intensity or 150 hours at this intensity. And it can be microfinanced by scratch cards or via the smartphone that its USB port recharges. So no longer buying oil is like a perpetual annuity equal to a month's extra income each year. So there goes the last bit of Rockefeller's 155-year-old kerosene business. So which of these two offerings is more exciting and lucrative and transformational? To which of these strategies would you entrust your company's fate and our common future? Your choice of energy's disruptive future could just save the world. Thank you all for your good work and your kind attention. I look forward to our discussion, and other than lunch today, I'll be here all today and tomorrow. Thank you.